like to invite the first presenter of this session, Ms. SITI MARIAM Daud, Senior Educational Therapist from the Dyslexia Association of Singapore, to present her research on perspectives of mainstream students with special educational needs on inclusion. Not only is Ms. Mariam an educational therapist, she is also an associate lecturer for the DAS Academy, where she contributes to training new educational therapists, allied educators, parents, and other practitioners. She holds a master's in special educational needs from the University of South Wales, a Bachelor of Science in Psychology from Central Queensland University, and a Diploma in Education from the Singapore National Institute of Education. Let us all put our hands together for Ms. Mariam.
Hello, good afternoon. Okay, my name is Mariam, as Hamada has introduced. Thank you for the introduction. Today, I will be sharing with you on a research project that I conducted as part of my master's. So the research project looks at the perspectives of mainstream students with special educational needs on inclusion. So it aims to examine how inclusive these students feel the practices are in their schools, and whether they face any barriers that may affect these perspectives. Okay, so before I go on into the research proper, so just to give you a brief background on why I decided to embark on this topic. So as I was doing my research, going through journal articles and deciding what to focus on, and I've always had an interest on inclusion, I found that though there were a lot of research on perspectives of parents and teachers on the local context on inclusion and inclusive education, there was very little research on perspectives of local students with SEN. So the few studies that I found were actually limited to students with visual impairments and autism. And of course, if we compare students with special educational needs, such as those with learning difficulties, such as dyslexia, those studies will not paint a bigger and clearer picture of how these other local students with SEN actually feel towards inclusion and inclusive education. So the majority of the other local students with SEN, especially those with learning difficulties, such as dyslexia, have largely been overlooked. And we know that dyslexia, through research, in fact, makes up the greatest percentage of students in local mainstream schools. Okay, so these are my research guiding questions. So I came up with the guiding questions based on the research that I found online through the journal articles. So the first question is, to what extent do students feel included or excluded in their schools and classrooms? So I'm going to be looking at both the academic aspects as well as the social emotional aspects. Okay, and when we talk about whether they feel included or excluded, of course, if they feel excluded, there are certain barriers that they will face. And so we're going to be looking at what some of the academic or social emotional barriers that they face that may affect their perspectives of the inclusion or inclusive education practices in their schools and classrooms. And if we're going to be talking about the barriers, of course we have to address these barriers. How can these barriers be overcome? Okay, so before I go on into the literature review, so I'll be looking at the lit review, the method, the results, as well as the discussion. Okay, while the studies in the lit review that I'll be looking at will look at students with various SEN, from mild to moderate SEN. Okay, so I'm going to exclude those with severe SEN because students with severe SEN are more likely to be enrolled in special schools rather than in mainstream schools. Okay, so while the studies will look at the students with various SEN, my study is just focused on students with dyslexia. Okay, so I'm just going to focus on a similar population, just students with dyslexia, because we have to understand that the SEN population is very diverse. Okay, and different populations will have different needs, and therefore they may have different perspectives. Okay, so then if I was going to look at a huge range, the results may not be very reliable in that sense. Okay, so the lit review will look at the students' perspectives. Okay, so we will start off with the positive perspectives. Okay, so there is in fact a body of research that has focused on students' perspectives as students with SEN perspectives, as a result of being educated alongside their typically developing peers. So one study found that students reported positive experiences and had positive perspectives when classroom activities were structured and organized to include them. So Kurth et al. Found that students with SEN, when there was a co-teaching model present in the classroom, okay, that means there were two teachers present in the classroom, one with the real teacher and with a teacher assistant, okay, and when there were frequent feedback and teaching, there were diverse elements of instruction, there were multiple means of representation, engagement, and technology, as well as students also appreciated the fact that teachers were always available for help and that they went over content several times with them. Okay. Teacher assistance support has also resulted in positive perspectives. So when we talk about teacher assistance support, we are basically talking about teacher assistants assisting the classroom teachers in providing academic instruction as well as supporting students with challenging behaviors. So students found that they recognized teacher assistance support as an effort to facilitate inclusion. And because of that, they've reported positive experiences through the support that they receive and therefore positive perspectives. Okay, last but not least, we have the strong peer and student-teacher relationships. So this means that when students had positive peer relationships, positive student-teacher interpersonal relationships, they had more positive experiences in school. Okay, so with these positive experiences, they were more likely to report positive perspectives. So when we talk about strong peer relationships, it basically means that the peers were tolerant, had tolerant perspectives of them, they were supportive and understanding, and were always available for help, okay, when their peers needed them. And when we talk about student-teacher relationships, we are basically talking about the fact that the teachers were approachable. Okay, the teachers were willing to adapt their teaching styles to fit the students, the SEN students' needs. Okay, and the teachers were aware of the difficulties that the students face, and they were also they created that culture of respect in the classroom, culture of tolerance and respect in the classroom as well. All right. So now we go on to the negative. Of course, there's always two sides to a coin. So not all students experience positive perspectives. Okay, so there were some students with SEN who did report negative perspectives. And for example, Monchi et al. Found that some students with SEN feel that they do not belong within the classroom. Okay, so some of them are socially excluded and socially isolated, and they felt that they were socially included less than their typically developing peers. And this was made worse with the fact that the teachers themselves did not try to include the students more, because the teachers themselves had too positive a view of the students with SEN social inclusion. So on the surface, it seemed that the students were getting along fine. Okay, the peers were, helping the students and everything, but really there was bullying and teasing happening when the teachers were not looking, when the teachers were not aware. Okay, the next one is the inflexible staff attitudes. Okay, so Gibb et al. Found that when teachers, in general teachers, had inflexible staff attitudes, students had negative experiences in school. And because of negative experiences, therefore, they reported negative perspectives. So they were saying that the inclusion practices in school were not really implemented well. So what do we mean by these inflexible staff attitudes? So we're talking about when teachers had difficulty adapting expectations of adequate progress, for example, or when teachers had difficulty adjusting behavior expectations, and instead of seeing things from an SEN point of view, they merely saw the student as naughty. Okay, and the teachers had an unwillingness to adapt their teaching styles to fit the needs of the students with SEN. So these are some examples of the inflexible staff attitudes that you will also see in the results later. Okay, so we move on to pull-out groups. Are most of you aware what pull-out groups are? You are, right? Okay, so pull-out groups, okay, so for pull-out groups, there were differing perspectives. Okay, so some students with SEN, they did like pull-out groups. They had positive perspectives of it, but some students had negative perspectives. So in Vaughan and Klinger's study, okay, he found that the students with SEN preferred to receive their instruction for the majority of the day from the pull-out groups, okay, because they felt that the work there was easier and fun, and they got the help that they needed to complete their work. Okay, on the other hand, the students in Orrock and Horton study, Hamdell, Matson, and Roll Patterson study found that they didn't like to go for pull-out groups, okay, because there was some ambivalence. They had some ambivalence in having to leave their regular classrooms. They were treated in a stigmatized manner and viewed less favorably by their peers because of the different support that they receive. Right? And some of them actually even experienced bullying and teasing because of having to attend pull-out groups. Okay, so the next one is homework. So similar to pull-out groups, there were two different perspectives for homework as well. Okay, homework was relatively perceived to be a negative experience for most of the students with SEN, and I'm sure for a lot of us here as well. Okay, so in Wilson and Ridge's study, some of the students did find homework. Yes, homework is meaningful, okay? It did reinforce concepts learned in class and help them to understand the concepts better, but a significant majority of the students in that study actually found that they were assigned too much homework each night, okay? And the homework given was boring and repetitive. So they were basically given the same thing almost every night. It was just drilling in a sense. And the students in McCrae, Vaughan, and Neil study also had the same sentiments, okay, and they found homework to be difficult, laborious, and frustrating, and felt that it would have been better if they were given the opportunity to complete the homework in school rather than at home, where they actually had the help of the teachers to complete it. Okay, so just a quick recap. So the various perspectives that we covered was basically the classroom structure, the academic support, the peer and student relationships, teachers' attitudes, as well as homework. Okay, so now we go on to the method. So how was this study conducted? So it was a qualitative approach using a homogeneous sampling method. Okay, so why homogeneous was because I wanted to purposefully sample individuals who possess a similar characteristic. And in this sense, all the participants, okay, at the time of the research project, they were all 10 years of age, okay? And they all have a specific diagnosis of dyslexia. They all attend local mainstream schools, and they all attend literacy intervention classes in the DAS. Okay, and they have to be attending, they have been attending the classes for at least a term. Okay, so there were two phases of data collection. So the questionnaire, okay, and where we collated responses from the participants, and then it was followed up by a semi-structured interview, because the idea of the semi-structured interview is basically questionnaires could, because of the closed-ended nature, right, it could only evaluate question issues. So therefore, the semi-structured interview was to provide a greater insight into the participants' written responses. Okay, so these are some questions from the questionnaire. Some of you were asking about it just now. Okay, so the questions in the questionnaire was designed in such a way that they were aligned with the research questions to gather feedback on the physical, the academic, the social, emotional aspects of school, right? And it was also designed in a way such that it was easy to complete for the young participants and hassle-free for them as well. So there were 16 questions in total, so it covered questions ranging from the things that the students like or dislike about school, whether they were given any extra support in school, and whether there were any changes they would like to see in school. So the questions in the questionnaire were basically adapted from various sources, and then it was modified to fit the needs of this research project as well. Okay, so unfortunately, okay, it's a small-scale sample. Okay, I only had 3 participants. Initially, there were more, but because they dropped out of the literacy program, they had to be withdrawn from the study as well. Okay, so all of them have been attending the classes for at least about 3 years during the time of the research project. Okay, so we move on to the results and the discussion now. Okay, so through the questionnaires, through the interviews conducted, so to transcribe the information, okay, code the keywords, and then 4 themes were then finalized and defined. And so these are the 4 themes: teachers' attitudes, the school system, and academic support, as well as the support from the peers. Okay, so teachers' attitudes, there were 2 different perspectives. There was a positive as well as a negative. The school system, there were only negative perspectives. Okay, so what is the school system? We'll look at it in a while. The academic support, there were both positive and negatives, and same for the support from the peers. All right. So teachers' characteristics define the classroom learning experiences. So what this basically means is that the teachers' attitudes towards the students with SEN actually affect the student-teacher interpersonal relationships, and therefore, in turn, it determines their experiences and their perspectives of school and their practices. So students constantly identify teacher characteristics as important, and they perceive student-teacher interpersonal relationship as critical aspects of their academic and social-emotional learning experiences in school. So during the interview, I found that students who use the word understanding and kind were more likely to have positive perspectives of school, more likely to have positive perspectives of their learning experiences in school. But participants who use the word fierce and strict, they did not like school, okay, they did not like the teacher, and therefore they did not like the lesson entirely. And if the lesson made up a big bulk of the day, they did not like to go to school at all, okay? So some of the students also talk about having inflexible teachers. So some of the participants talk about, I told my teacher I have dyslexia, but she doesn't care. Okay, so those some of the comments that the participants actually said, and some of the students felt that their teachers were not approachable. Like, I cannot even go to the teacher if I needed help. Okay, but there was one participant who did say that she was quite close with a teacher, like she could even go with the teacher for personal problems and not just academic problems. So majority of the students, okay, in the research project, actually, they had experience with inflexible teachers, and therefore they didn't really have very positive perspectives of school and the practices. Okay, so the next one, school system, is basically we're talking about long school hours. Okay, all the participants in the research project, they felt that school was just too long, and school just started way too early, okay? So, and I'm sure the argument for a later school day is not new. There's been a lot of research, okay, not in Singapore, but overseas, that school should start later because we need to give students opportunity to wake up later so they'll be more focused during the day. And starting school earlier in the morning actually prevents children from getting a full night's sleep. So according to the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, okay, middle school and high school should start no earlier than 8:30 a.m. Okay, so when students wake up later in the day, when students are given the opportunity to wake up later, they'll be more focused during the day. But of course, in Singapore, we know that most schools start before 8 a.m. So students fall short of their sleep targets, especially when they stayed up, finish all the homework that they have. And in long term, this has been associated with poor school performance as well. Okay, so a point to note is that, okay, although the findings of the research project is targeted at students with dyslexia, we can also say that the argument for a later school day will still benefit all other students, not just students with learning difficulties. All students, if they are given the opportunity to wake up even 15 minutes later, it will actually make a big difference in terms of their focus in school. Okay, so academic support, the next one. Here we talk about the teaching arrangements in school. So interestingly, what I found was that none of the students received any form of formal academic support. So they didn't attend any pull-out classes, okay, and they didn't attend any sort of even remedial or supplementary in schools. So, but one of the students received teacher assistant support. So what happens was that there will be a teacher teaching in front of the class, and then the student is at the back with another teacher, and the other teacher is basically explaining to the student what the teacher in front is explaining. So in a more layman's kind of term, easier for the student to understand. Okay, the student, she acknowledged the fact that, yes, she found this very helpful because she was able to understand the concepts better. But she did not like the support because she recognized that this was just, in her words, a relief teacher. It was not her real teacher. She would have preferred if it was a real teacher who made the effort to actually explain it to her rather than engaging a relief teacher to help explain the concepts to her. So students, even at a very young age, they can actually differentiate the real teacher roles apart from the teacher assistant roles. Okay, a good thing was that there was no potential social stigma that was reported. So I did ask her, like, you sit at the back of the class, like, do your classmates look at you differently or treat you in a different manner because of the support that you receive? And then the participant actually said that the fact that she received that support made her classmates more aware of her needs, and they were more tolerant and supportive. So they will always help her whenever she needs help. So that was a good thing for her. Okay, so like I mentioned, none of the students were attending any special groups or pull-out classes. And in terms of formal peer support arrangements, so we talk about the buddy system. Okay, none of the students had any formal buddy as well. So whoever they were just seated beside, there's a person that they will ask questions and they will receive the help needed. And it was interesting that when I asked, like, would it be helpful if you actually had a buddy? Some of the students said, why would I need a buddy? Okay, so they had this negative stigma from themselves that I don't need someone to help me, I can help myself. Okay, and yes, homework was in line with the lead review. They felt that homework was too much and repetitive. It was basically the same thing again, the same piece of worksheet that they receive every day, and sometimes it would just drag until the night. Okay, one of the participants suggested that maybe homework could be given on alternate days as well, instead of every day. Okay, so when we talk about support from peers, okay, this support from peers is different from the academic support that we saw earlier. This talks about having reciprocal friendships, being understanding and supportive, and having tolerant perspectives. So no negative peer relationships were reported. The peers did not view them in a negative light, so that was a good thing. And it could also be because the participants were able to exhibit positive social behavior. So therefore, the peers were more tolerant of them and were able to socially accept them. Okay, so we talk about the different themes, and these themes are also the barriers as well. Okay, so the first one we saw was the teachers' attitudes. Okay, so school system, I took out early school hours, so that was a barrier for them. Okay, homework as well as the poor support. Okay, so teachers' attitudes, how then? This clearly shows that there's a need to change teachers' attitudes. Okay, raising awareness, okay, and making teachers more aware of the needs of students with learning difficulties. And one of the recommendations through research and through the interviews with the participants is changes in schools' practices. I think in NIE now, not a lot of teachers are trained in special needs, and even during teacher training, there's only a very small portion of special education training. So what could be done is really a top-down approach, right? To change teacher preparation programs so that teachers are more prepared when they have students with learning difficulties in the classrooms. Okay, and when we talk about early school hours, okay, one of the things that we can do, of course, is the delay in school start times. Okay, so there was one research done locally. It was done only with one school. So what the school did was they actually extended. They started school later. I think it was about 8:30 a.m. So they got the feedback from teachers. The feedback was very positive. The students were more attentive in class. Even though they had to go home later, they were actually more attentive in class. Okay, they were more focused. But of course, the feedback from the parents was a different thing altogether. So they didn't want to start school later because of traffic conditions, logistic issues. So that was one of the things that deterred them from making it permanent. But of course, it is something that is a long-term thing. Okay, on the long term, it does help in focus and attention. So it could be something that we can consider. Okay, relooking homework policies, quality versus quantity. So like the participants mentioned, a lot of it is just drilling. They didn't really learn anything from the drilling. So setting homework must be meaningful. There must be an objective to it. And there's actually research that says there's a guideline to give homework. So let's say the child is 7 years old, 10 minutes. Okay, basically, the child should be able to complete homework in 10 minutes. And every time you go up 1 year, you just add 10 more minutes. But I think in our system now, homework is really a bulk of the student's education, right? So it's something that has to be relooked as well. And again, it could start from the school, but ultimately it has to be a top-down approach. Okay, when we talk about poor support, okay, this was something that was brought up by a student too. She mentioned that when she was younger, okay, I think in lower primary, the teachers actually asked her to read in class, but because she was not able to read, so the teacher actually reprimanded her in front of the whole class, and she was crying while her peers were just laughing at her. Okay, so this is very important because the teacher, I'm not sure herself or himself, has to be a positive role model. So there was lack of awareness from the teacher's part, and it was transferred to the students as well. So the teachers themselves have to be aware, has to promote a culture of respect, and has to be a positive role model for the students. Okay, so conclusion. Okay, of course, recognize that it's a small scale because of the dropouts. Okay, and so the findings cannot really be generalized to the other students, other local students with SEN. There was a possible social desirability bias, like for example, when I asked students, some of them would just answer, I don't know, I don't remember, okay, and they may not want to actually answer truthfully, so that could be possible. One of the students, when I asked why, she would just go, because. Then I would just ask further, but why? Just because. Okay, so she didn't really want to answer the questions. Okay, so I will not be really be able to know whether the results are actually in a sense, valid, okay? But of course, if we look into expanding this research to make it more naturalistic and less biased, all right, we have to supplement with other methods. So instead of just questionnaires and interviews, we can go field observations, right? And this would provide a more realistic result. And widening the scope. So what happened was that, okay, the students that I interviewed were all students of the DES, and they have been with the DES for some time. So they may have had a certain, they know what they want, what they expect, okay, from the teachers of the DES, and therefore they transfer that to the school setting. Okay, this is how what I receive from the DES, so I expect this in school as well. Okay, but what happens if I interview students who have never received intervention before? Okay, so the students with DES have a benchmark. Like for example, okay, I expect these kind of practices for myself. But students who have never received intervention, they may have a different benchmark altogether. So it's really widening the scope and see whether their perspectives are actually different or not. Okay, so how are these findings important to the DS? Of course, advocacy. So we have to be advocates for our students. We have to create the awareness for our students and raise the awareness. Okay, through more, by of course conducting more training as well for teachers and parents, okay, of new students with the DES. All right, so yes, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.